Hello, many different shades here. Once again, I have completely underestimated the sheer amount of stuff to talk about when it comes to chaos. This time it's the chaos minions. You see, I had originally planned to make a video on the minions of the four main chaos gods, being Korn, Nurgle, Slaanesh and Tzeentch. Sounds simple enough? Well, as you can see, if you take a look at the time bar below this video, it's pretty long. And how many chaos gods have I covered in this time? 1. Yep, 1. You see, my aim with this whole playlist is to create as most detailed an encyclopedia of Warhammer fantasy lore as possible, covering factual information from sources like the rulebooks, army books and trusted internet sites, along with all the information that can be gleaned from the hundreds of novels that have led to what I believe to be the most detailed and fleshed out fantasy world in literature. Or at least out of what I've come across. I mean, literally hundreds of books. Now, I'm not saying that it's the most well written, though many of the novels are good, but it's a huge world. I don't think anyone can argue with that. And one that you can truly immerse yourself in. Anyway, like I say, I want my playlist to show this world from start to finish, to show off this whole story, and to be researched enough that other people like me, who like to lose themselves in fantasy worlds, can look up any information that they seek with ease, or watch the playlist through and experience the entire story of Warhammer Fantasy from creation to destruction. I'm rambling now, so back to the point. Basically, I'm still new to this YouTube thing and still very much learning. I think I've recently, in my last few videos, found a solid formula on how to present and what to present, but I have continuously underestimated just how much there is to present. But that is great. I want this project to be huge. However, I'm sure anyone who might be watching won't want to watch a 2.5-hour YouTube video. And if I cover all the Chaos Gods minions in one video, like I originally said I would, that's what we're going to end up with. So, once again, I am going to have to divide this up, and there are now going to be many parts to these Chaos Lore vids. How many parts? I have no idea until I write them. Therefore, this next video is on the minions of the blood god Korn, and most probably each god will now get their own video. So, that's the plan. I hope you enjoy. By the way, I am aware of the hypocritical nature of taking 5 minutes to explain that my video is going to be too long. Hello, Shades here, and check out the Devil Shades. All hail Google Images. Now, following on from my previous video, it's now time for a topic that I've really been looking forward to doing. The many different followers of Chaos. Now, in Warhammer Fantasy, there are 2 fundamental types of minions of Chaos, and they are the demonic kind and the mortal kind. The demonic kind are creatures born within the realm of chaos, and they are sustained by chaos energy, much like the gods themselves, only on a much smaller scale. The mortals are intelligent creatures born in the physical world, such as your humans, your elves, etc., who for many different reasons, which we will be looking at in this video, decide to worship a chaos god and do its bidding. As with all things related to chaos, however, things are not that simple. These two lines can cross, as a mortal follower of chaos, if particularly favoured by his chaos god of choice, can be transformed into a demon. Why he or she would want this to happen? They would be ugly, they may get horns, and possibly even a tail. We shall see. But we'll get to that later on in the video. One more thing to mention is that I am aware that we theorised in the last video that all the gods, both good and evil, are probably chaos gods. However, in this video, I'm going to be dealing with the followers of the four main chaos gods: Korn, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh. I'd like to give a quick shout out to Eric Bryant, who reminded me of and helped me expand upon some really interesting ideas on this concept. And by the way, just so you know guys, that is my first ever YouTube shout out. I feel like a real YouTuber now. Anyway, let us begin. Starting with the demonic followers of the chaos gods. And again, I'm going to split this into categories. We're going to start off with the lesser demons that make up the bulk of a demonic army, taking the place of the typical soldiers. I'll then describe the greater demons that act typically as generals and rare units within the army. Finally, we'll be moving on to particular named demons, and this will be the most fun, as these famous demons have some of the best stories behind them. Well now, we haven't got all day, so let's get started. And first up, it's the Blood God, the god of murder. Please welcome to the stage the Daemons of Khorne. The most basic and numerous lesser demons of Khorne, with the equivalent standing as a foot soldier within the blood god's demonic armies, are the bloodletters. And I should mention that while I'll be using the Demons of Chaos army book in some cases when talking about the bloodletters and all the other demons discussed in this video, my main sources of information will be the novels, particularly the Liber Chaotica, as it directly deals with all the aspects of chaos in great detail, but when required, other novels as well. Now that that's out of the way, back to the bloodletters. The most basic and numerous lesser demons of Khorne, with the equivalent standing as a foot soldier within the blood god's demonic armies, are the bloodletters. Oh, and I should mention that while I will be using the Demons of Chaos army book in some cases when talking about the bloodletters and all the other demons discussed in this video, my main sources of information will be the novels, particularly the Liber Chaotica, as it directly deals with all aspects of chaos in great detail, but when required, other novels as well. Now that that's out of the way, back to the bloodletters. A bloodletter is a demonic creature around the size of a man, with a skinny, wiry body and blood-red skin. It has long, curled horns on its head, small spikes covering its body, and carries a sword called a Hellblade. That is an awesome name for a sword. It's distinctive by its long spiky blade that's covered in flames. When in the realm of chaos, the bloodletters spend their time fighting amongst each other to decide who gets to enter the physical world when Korn next decides to send his legions into battle. The civilized races have many names for the bloodletters, such as the Teeth of Death, the Takers of Skulls, the Warriors of Blood, and the Horned Ones. Such is the ferocity of the bloodletters that even their spit is said to burn through skin. When marching into battle, they can be heard chanting in their demonic language, and some carry tattered banners in a foul imitation of mortal armies. Though they may try to imitate mortal armies when on the march, when they close into battle, their demonic nature takes over, and all cohesion is lost as they attack with berserk fury, slashing with sword, tooth, and claw as they try to claim as much blood as possible for their blood god master. Remember, Korn does not care how the blood flows, only that it flows. Next up, we have the Hounds of Khorne. Beasts designed and trained for war, much the same way as dogs are used for war in the mortal armies. However, when it comes to demonic dogs, there are of course a few differences. Let's start off with their look. The first and most obvious difference between a fleshhound and a regular war dog is the blood red skin, so characteristic of the forces of Korn. They're also far larger than a normal dog, with big spikes running across their spine. They have glowing red eyes, massive teeth that wouldn't look out of place in the mouth of a lion, and a bestial, almost reptilian, dragon-like snout. They also have big flaps just behind their ears, reminiscent of some dinosaurs actually, but no idea really why they have them. The next big difference would naturally be their temperament. The ferocity of a fleshhound goes far beyond that of a wild animal. The moment they come into existence within the realm of chaos, they are imbued with the same rage and bloodlust as the god that they serve. Their entire nature is driven towards the need to kill and rip apart whatever is placed in front of them. Their hunger for blood and meat is ever present and all-consuming. Now, unfortunately, there don't seem to be too many pictures of fleshhounds on the internet, so I was struggling a little bit and I thought I'd draw you a picture in Microsoft Paint. Don't be too hard on me, it was my first try. Anyway, every fleshhound has secured around its neck a thick, spiky collar made of brass, which has the name, rather uncreatively, the Collar of Korn. It's probably because it's a collar given by Korn. These collars, that are seen as gifts from Korn, actually have spikes on the inside as well as out, so that when you put one on, it stabs deep into the flesh of the wearer, causing an intense pain that is intended to fuel the anger of the wearer. On a more positive note, they have the ability to negate many spells that may be cast by enemies, giving the fleshhounds a strong resistance to magic. Now the collar, once placed on the fleshhound, can never be taken off. Wonder what the RSPCA would think of that. Just realised I forgot the colour on my fleshhound. Not very good, is it? Much better. Now again, these demonic hounds go by many names in the mortal world. They are called the Hunters of Blood, the Inevitable Ones, the Flesh Renders, and the Creatures of Corn. Now when the Blood God unleashes his armies, the Flesh Hounds are always a familiar sight. More often than not, they are given as gifts by Korn to his champions, both demonic and mortal, that he feels are worthy of them. When going into battle, this champion may decide to keep them by his side on a leash, or allow them to roam freely amongst the ranks. In a large host, there may be many champions who own these gifts, and the ferocious hounds can join together to form great packs within the Khornate host. In a military sense, the hounds can be used as shock troops to break up an enemy formation, as protection for their champion master. However, the primary and most devastating use of the Flesh Hounds comes when the battle is drawing to an end. When the Blood God's army has battered down the enemy and all their courage has left them, the hounds are released to chase down the fleeing soldiers. No mercy is shown. Korn is a god of blood and murder, and these great beasts ensure that as few of the enemy survives as possible. The hounds chase them down and tear the fleeing soldiers to shreds, gorging themselves on their blood and the fresh meat. It is even said that they drag the bodies back to the realm of chaos, so that more skulls can be added to Korn's ever-growing skull throne. Our third Demons of Khorne are the Juggernauts. Now, these are slightly different as they're mainly used as huge demonic mounts for worthy champions of Korn. They're very rarely seen on their own, and the few occasions that they are tend to be when they've been separated from their rider. They look freaking awesome. They are huge demonic beasts that, in my opinion, physically most closely resemble rhinoceros. They're of a similar size to rhinoceros as well. The most interesting aspect of their physical appearance is that they are a blend of animal and machinery. If the demon has any skin under all the metal plates, then we know not what it looks like, but from the outside it looks as if the demon's skin is armour plating. The giant beast is covered in great plates of brass and iron that are fused to its skin. These plates are naturally mainly blood red, it being Korn, so they're blood red in colour, with brass also being fairly prominent. The plates are so thick that it would be incredibly hard for any attacker to break through, and they too wear the collar of Korn, making it very resistant to magic. A great iron helmet covers the beast's entire head, leaving visible only the huge sharp teeth ready to chomp into the flesh of mortals, and cold white eyes that when looked into reveal a demon on the edge of berserk fury, filled with anger and hatred. What names are these creatures given by the civilized races of the Warhammer world? They are called the Steeds of Corn, Blood Crushers, Juggers, Blights of Corn, and Soul Crushers. The Liber Chaotica has a paragraph that I think perfectly describes the Juggernauts, and it goes as follows. The Juggernaut is neither beast nor machine, but a demonic amalgamation of both. A creature of living metal, whose flesh is brass, and whose blood is pure fire. They are said to be the most brutal of all Korn's many demons, and only the most favoured of his warriors are granted the boon of riding a juggernaut into battle. When the Blood God's host goes to battle, A juggernaut is a terrifying yet very rare sight. Only the most powerful of Khorne's chosen are gifted this demonic steed, and so it tends to only be the warlord of the army who goes into battle riding a juggernaut. On extremely rare occasions, when a Khornate army of such a size that is only maybe seen once in a lifetime walks the field, it is possible for many great warlords to band together to create a cavalry unit of juggernauts. And just imagine that. A whole unit of beasts the size and strength of rhinos, covered in armour that cannot be pierced, and ridden by such great warriors that the god of battle has seen fit to dispense upon them such gifts. I would feel extremely sorry for the enemy army that very soon will be ridden into the dust. To finish things off, I should just mention an interesting theory about the Juggernauts and how they came into being creatures of demonic flesh and machinery. The theory is that they are created by the Chaos Dwarves in their great foundry cities. Now I'll go into this theory when I get to the videos on the Chaos Dwarves, and I'll say no more about it now, but it's something to ponder. Right, on to the last of the general classes of demon within Khorne's army. And of course, I have saved the best and most powerful for last. It's time to talk about the Bloodthirster, the greater demon of Korn. In Warhammer lore, I cannot overstate the strength and power that a greater demon of Korn wields. On the battlefield, it is arguably one of the most powerful foes that can be faced, and in the rare times when it manifests within the physical world, it takes nothing short of entire armies to make an attempt to send it back to where it came from. So, what does one of the most powerful creatures in Warhammer look like? Well, first of all, they are huge, standing far taller than a man, standing nearly 10 metres tall. They stand on two legs, have a humanoid shape, topped off by a snarling bestial face that's most similar to a bull's with long curling horns to finish the job. Sprouting from their backs are huge bat-like wings, which in battle can be used to great effect. Often a bloodthirster will soar above the battlefield, searching for where the fighting is thickest and the areas where they can cause the most damage to the enemy. Their skin is a dark red colour, most similar to dried blood, with thick black veins running across their arms and legs. In terms of weapons and armour, their torso, shoulders and thighs are protected by thick armour of what appears to be iron and brass. Yet all is not what it seems, as this is chaos armour, forged in the great furnaces within the realm of the Chaos Dwarves. Again, I will talk about the Chaos Dwarves in their own video. However, it's worth knowing that in Warhammer lore, dwarves are famous for their skill at making armour, and are the most talented of the races in this craft. And so Chaos armour is arguably the finest armour in the world, offering protection perhaps only matched by the Gromril armour of the civilised dwarf kingdoms. This armour cannot be pierced by even the finest of ordinary weapons. It is only weapons imbued with magic that may stand a chance of besting it. Anyway, more of that in the Dwarven videos. Speaking of magical weapons, most Bloodthirsters carry a great axe covered in dark demonic runes of chaos, making it a powerful magical weapon capable of slicing through the thickest armours and breaking through all but the most powerful magical protections. Once again, I would like to stress that I'm aware that if your only information on the Warhammer Fantasy lore is coming from these videos, you will not be aware of the different ways magic exists in the Warhammer world. Firstly, thank you for letting me be your first guide into this fascinating fantasy world. Secondly, I will be making videos covering all this stuff in great detail, and I will in particular be making a video on magic and the many different forms it can take and ways that it can be used. For now, let me give you a quick snippet on the stuff relevant to the Bloodthirster. And if you absolutely cannot wait to see more on this, I admire your quest for knowledge, and Arch Warhammer, who I am sure you have heard of if you have any interest in Warhammer, as he has the biggest YouTube channel on the subject. He has a video on magic in Warhammer Fantasy that is really, really good and informative, and definitely well worth a watch. I'll leave a link in the description, I'm sure he won't mind. Ha, my baby channel with 52 subscribers is like a fly to him. But we will catch up with him one day. Anyway, getting a little off track here. Let me start by talking about the runes on the Greater Demon of Khorne's axe. Basically, there is a technique that was possibly first developed by the dwarves, but that several of the races can do to varying degrees of skill, that is able to capture magic. Magic usually runs free and wild. This binds it to a specific object. Nobody's quite sure on the details of how this works. At least I've never read anything about the details of how it works. But a rune is a symbol that relates to a particular magical effect. And when these runes are carved into any object, but normally weapons, and certain other unknown things are done, the object is imbued with the magical powers that the particular runes related to. Runes will again be discussed in detail in my video on magic, but for now, all we really need to know is that there are runes that relate to chaos and their dark magic. And the Bloodthirster's axe has carved upon it some of the most powerful and devastating runes that Chaos has to offer, making it an incredibly powerful magical weapon. The last little thing to mention before we get back to the video proper is that I talked about the axe being able to break through magical barriers. What this means, in short, is that another use of magic is using it to form a protection. This can take the form of magical armour, which the Bloodthirster actually has itself, where the magic is imbued into the armour through various different methods, which results in a level of protection that can go far beyond the limits of the armour's base materials. It could also take the form of a barrier made up of pure magical energy that surrounds the subject and protects them from physical attacks. There are many other ways in which magic can be used for protection. The point I wanted to make was that the Bloodthirster and its rune axe are powerful enough to defeat and smash through all but the very strongest of protective magics. Wow, that was a long sidetrack. But now that we are up to speed, a really interesting thing to talk about in relation to the Bloodthirster is its intelligence. A Greater Demon of Korn is not a mindless beast, but a very intelligent and cunning creature. perfectly designed for its role as general of the blood god's armies. An example of a bloodthirster's intelligence is their ability to speak every language that the many different races of the Warhammer world use. It is not uncommon when someone encounters a bloodthirster for them to have a chat with it. Usually the chat involves begging for mercy, and the chat tends to be followed by a quick and gruesome death. For the demon's new pal, anyway. Another example, and an important one, that shows a bloodthirster's intelligence is the demon's great ability when it comes to battle strategy. On this topic, I'm going to read a small section in the Warhammer Fantasy Wiki that explores this in a very well-written way. On the battlefield, the bloodthirster is the master of war. He binds his legions to his murderous will, driving his forces to acts of greater slaughter that exalt the name of Korn. They are beings of incredible cunning, instinctively capable of defeating the best and brightest mortal generals. They can sense which way the battle is flowing, instantly seeing the chance to use their blades and troops to the greatest effect. With such an impressive demon, I'm sure the civilized races have some good names for the bloodthirster, and they do. They are known as the Fists of Corn, Drinkers of Blood, Lords of Skulls, Eaters of Gore and Flesh, Deathbringers of Corn, Blooded Ones, Guardians of the Throne, High-Handed Slayers, and War-Given Form. It's a lot of names, and I'm sure there are many more. The Bloodthirster, being the greatest of Korn's minions, most closely represents the aspects of the blood god himself. Being such an accurate manifestation of a god of war means that only the greatest of the great, when it comes to mortal warriors, stand a chance of besting this demon in battle. One final note on our demon friend involves my previous video on Chaos Lore. In that video, I talk about Chaos Energy and how it is needed to sustain demon kind. I also talked about the events that led to the ability for Chaos Energy to enter the physical Warhammer world. I would just like to finish off this segment by saying that a greater demon of Korn needs a huge amount of Chaos Energy to have entered the physical world in order for it to manifest itself. The amounts of energy needed do not gather there often, and therefore a bloodthirster is only able to come to the physical world on very rare occasions. Typically when a huge chaos warband is on the move. However, when they do, elf, dwarf, man, whatever you had better watch out. Right, time to be finishing off the study of Korn's demonic servants, and I'm gonna have to talk a little bit quieter now because it's late and everyone's in bed. But anyway, let's explore the stories behind some of the more famous and interesting demons in the blood god's care. Since we've just checked out the bloodthirsters, let's begin with a particularly ruthless example of their kind. Korn's ex-general and greatest slayer, Skarbrand, the Exiled One. The Bloodthirsters are the most powerful Khornate demons, and Skarbrand was the most powerful of them all. Because of this, he was most favoured of Korn's minions, and was made the general of the blood god's entire demonic host. In this role, Skarbrand excelled. In battle, he slew more of the enemy than any other fighter, spilling more blood in the name of the blood god than any other, and collecting for him the most skulls to add to the throne. To witness Skarbrand in battle was to witness Korn incarnate. his twin axes slicing through any foe with such rage and ruthless abandon as befitting his position. Within the realm of chaos, he ruled with absolute authority and hacked down any challenger that sought his title. Korn saw all of this, and in return favoured Skarbrand the most of all his minions. Naturally, however, the story doesn't end there. That would be too easy and not really much of a story at all. So, what happened next? Tzeentch, the Lord of Change, had had his eye on Skarbrand for some time, witnessing the devastation he caused in battle and the absolute loyalty he showed to his blood god master. Ever being the cunning, manipulative type, Tzeentch came up with a plan to create a bit of chaotic change within Korn's realm. I should mention quickly that whilst the four great chaos gods do occasionally join together if they feel there is a leader worthy enough to back, the majority of the time they are enemies, vying for power, and in particular, Korn and Tzeentch do not get on at all. Therefore, Tzeentch decided to put his plan for Skarbrand into action, and this is what followed. It first began with whispers. The Lord of Change would whisper into Skarbrand's ear, taunting and goading him that he was weak, that he was a slave to another that was far greater than him. Tzeentch manipulated him into thinking all his hard efforts were for nothing and were going unappreciated. With the seed of doubt towards his master placed in his head, the next step for Tzeentch was to change tactics a little. This time, Tzeentch stroked Skarbrand's great ego, telling him that he was the most powerful being in existence, that he could slay anything and could never be defeated in battle, that because of this, he should be the ultimate ruler, that it was his rightfully earned place to be the blood god himself. With all these thoughts flying around Skarbrand's head, he began committing greater and greater acts of savagery and murder, and his rage grew to even greater heights. Eventually, he could take no more. Consumed by hate that had been manipulated and channeled towards Korn himself by Tzeentch, Skarbrand picked up his twin rune axes and walked towards the great brass citadel, where sat the skull throne that he had so thoughtlessly helped expand since his creation. Upon the throne, as always, sat the blood god Korn. With Tzeentch's trickery upon him, Skarbrand, the most favoured of all Korn's minions, marched up the skull throne as he had done so many times before, but this time, waiting for the perfect moment, when Korn's gaze was elsewhere, he sprang into action, raising his axes, and struck the blood god with a perfect slice, putting all the immense strength that he possessed into the blow. Under normal circumstances, such a strike would have obliterated any foe. Yet when the act was done, and Skarbrand looked to see what he had done, all that he had achieved was creating the smallest of cracks upon the blood god's armour. Korn himself remained completely undamaged. As the seconds passed, the blood god's head began to turn in his direction, in the direction of his once most favoured servant, and the look upon his face was of utter fury. Before Skarbrand could react, he reached out and grabbed him by the throat, Korn's infinite strength throttling him to almost destruction. Korn's purpose, however, was not to destroy his traitorous servant. He choked him until all the personality that made him who he was squeezed out of him, all the intelligence and ambition, until all that remained in him was the all-consuming rage that had filled him when he had dared to betray the god of blood. Skarbrand was now a mindless, rage-fueled killing machine. Korn then proceeded to drag him to the very top of his brass citadel and held him up to the sky for all his minions to see. Here is an example of what happens to any fool that tries to betray me. After the example had been made, Korn stretched back his arm, lifting the giant Bloodthirster as if he were light as a feather, and hurled the great beast to the other side of the realm of chaos. The once general of all Korn's armies had now been banished into exile, a permanent exile. Filled with unbelievable rage without point or purpose or any kind of thought indicative to intelligent life, Skarbrand wandered the realm, slaughtering anything that came into contact with him. It is only now that Skarbrand had truly become a physical manifestation of Korn. He has become absolute wrath incarnate. Wherever he goes, war and bloodshed follow, and all of it is dedicated to Korn. Whether intended or not, Skarbrand now serves Korn more faithfully and impressively than ever before. To the present day, Skarbrand remains a mindless tornado of death and destruction, killing and spilling as much blood as possible and dedicating it to his absolute master, Korn. And while Korn may revel in enormous sacrifices offered to him by his ex-general, for Skarbrand it is all for nothing. Remember, this is Korn we are talking about. He shows absolutely no mercy, and his rulings are final. Skarbrand was exiled for eternity, and in exile he will forever remain. Our next famous Demon of Khorne has the reputation of being the most powerful bloodletter in the Blood God's army. His name is Uzul, but most refer to him as Skulltaker. Now, why would he have a nickname like that? I think we can hazard a guess. This is the story of Skulltaker. One day, in the deep mists of time within the realm of chaos, Korn was up to business as usual, creating bloodletters to swell the ranks of his demonic army. Whilst all bloodletters have a vicious reputation, one in particular took it a little bit further. When Uzul, don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but we'll go with it, Uzul was born, before he had his nickname, he had a little look around and then proceeded to spring up and murder the very first living creature that entered his sight. This happened to be another bloodletter, and one that was a fair bit older and more experienced in battle than our Uzul. Nevertheless, he jumped up, charged, and sliced his foe down, relishing in his first kill. This naturally pleased Father Korn, and from that moment on, the Blood God kept an eye on this particular bloodletter. Uzul continued to impress, being particularly proficient on the battlefield, and taking many more skulls for the Blood God's throne than all the other bloodletters. Because of this, Uzul was rewarded with Korn's favour, and once Uzul took his 888th skull, Korn was so impressed that he made Uzul his official executioner. It was at this point that he was given the name Skulltaker, and was rewarded with his very own Juggernaut to ride into battle. But again, why Skulltaker? Well, in battle, Uzul seeks out the most powerful foes in the enemy army. He then proceeds to challenge them to a one-on-one duel, which he often emerges from victorious. You could say that when duelling, Skulltaker has a particular style. Tiring the enemy down, he then proceeds to use his serrated hellblade to chop off his opponent's limbs one by one, taking great pleasure in keeping his opponent alive for as long as possible. whilst cutting off as many pieces of the body as possible. Once satisfied, he uses what magical skill he possesses to conjure up some hellfire, a substance that burns at a much higher temperature than regular fire and is far harder to put out. With this, he burns his victims' heads to a crisp, leaving only the skull behind. But again, why Skulltaker? I'm getting to it. After the fire has burnt out and only the skull is left, he fetches it up and seeks out a new opponent to repeat the process and collect as many skulls as possible. Once the battle has been won, Skulltaker returns to the realm of chaos and offers up his collection of skulls to Korn. The reason he is called Skulltaker is that if he has managed to collect the skulls of a particularly powerful opponent, Korn allows him to keep the skull, which he then attaches to his cape. And at this point, he has so many skulls that his cape is completely covered in them. This cape is given the name the Cape of Skulls, and all that lay eyes on him know that he has taken all these skulls in battle, and that they could be next. And so when talking about this particularly powerful demon, the races of the Warhammer world call him Skulltaker. I'm going to leave this video there, as it's already pretty darn long, yet there is still one demon of the Blood God to talk about, and in my opinion, she definitely has the best story behind her. However, in order to understand her fully, there is another aspect of the Warhammer lore that we have to talk about. In this video, all the demons discussed are ones born and bred as demons within the realm of chaos. But not all demons took this path. There is another way to achieve the immortality and sorcerous powers that demonhood grants, and this path is open to the mortal world. So the next video is going to be a shorter one, following straight off from this one, on the subject of the mortals, like humans and elves, who made the decision to follow and dedicate their lives to the Chaos Gods, in the hope of catching their favour and eventually being granted the gift of demonhood. The second part of the video will then be on this particular mortal who achieved this goal and much, much more, becoming one of the most powerful and important demons in Warhammer lore. Perhaps if anyone has actually made it this far into the video, which is probably as rare as reaching demonhood, they can try and have a guess at which demon I am talking about. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please rate, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff, and I shall be seeing you very soon. Toodaloo!